Welcome to NibblePop Stories. Today we will hear the story of Homer's Iliad. A long time ago, before people built the great cities and kingdoms we know today, the world was a very different place. Most people believed in many gods who lived above the clouds on a high mountain called Mount Olympus. These gods were not just stories told by old men and women. People believed they were real and that they watched over everything on earth. The gods were powerful. They could control the weather, the seas, the sun, and the moon. But even though they were so mighty, these gods were also very much like people. They laughed, argued, got jealous, fell in love, and sometimes made mistakes. At the top of all the gods was Zeus. He was the king and the ruler of the sky. His beard was thick and curled, his eyes were bright as lightning, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder. He could make storms or bring sunshine. Zeus was wise, but also sometimes quick to anger, and he often had to settle arguments between the other gods. His wife was Hera, the queen of the gods, who was proud and beautiful, but also known for her jealousy, especially when it came to Zeus's attention wandering to other women. There were many other gods, each with their own special powers and stories. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, war, and clever plans. She was Zeus's daughter and was famous for her intelligence and fairness. Aphrodite was the goddess of love and beauty. She was so lovely that flowers bloomed wherever she walked, and everyone, both gods and mortals, admired her. Apollo was the god of the sun, music, and prophecy, and his twin sister Artemis was the goddess of the moon and the hunt. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, ruled the sea and could shake the earth with his trident. There were also gods who lived in the underworld or cared for the fields, the forests, and the rivers. On Mount Olympus, the gods held grand feasts, played games, and sometimes watched the people below. But the gods did not always get along. Sometimes they argued and fought, and their disagreements could affect the whole world. One day, the gods and goddesses gathered for a very special event, the wedding of Peleus, a brave mortal hero, and Thetis, a beautiful sea nymph. This marriage was very important. Thetis was not just any nymph. She was the daughter of the ancient sea god Nereus and was known for her kindness and beauty. It was said that Thetis would give birth to a son who would be greater than his father. The gods wanted to celebrate this special union, and everyone on Mount Olympus was invited. Hera brought sparkling gifts, Apollo played his lyre, and the halls were filled with laughter and song. But there was one goddess who was not invited. Her name was Eris, and she was the goddess of discord and trouble. Wherever she went, arguments and fights followed. The other gods feared that if Eris came to the wedding, she would ruin the happiness with her tricks and quarrels. So she was left off the guest list. Feeling insulted and furious, Eris decided to take revenge in her own way. While the gods danced and feasted, Eris quietly crept near the entrance to the hall. She held a golden apple in her hand. On the shiny surface of the apple, she had carefully scratched three words: for the fairest. Without a word, she rolled the apple into the hall and slipped away unseen. At first, no one noticed the apple as it gleamed among the tables, but soon the bright light caught the eyes of three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each of them believed she was the most beautiful and the most worthy of the apple. Hera, proud and majestic, was sure she deserved it as the queen of the gods. Athena, wise and graceful, was certain her cleverness and beauty made her the right choice. Aphrodite, gentle and sparkling, had no doubt she was the fairest of all. The three goddesses began to argue, each raising her voice and making her case before the others. The guests at the feast tried to ignore them, but soon the argument grew louder, echoing through the grand hall. The other gods and heroes looked on nervously. The argument was not just about the apple, it was about pride and honor, and none of the three would back down. Zeus, who was supposed to settle disputes, found himself in a difficult position. He knew that if he chose one goddess, the other two would be angry at him. Even the king of the gods feared the trouble that could come from their wrath. He thought for a long time and finally decided to pass the problem to someone else. He declared that the fairest should be chosen not by a god but by a mortal. This would keep the peace among the gods, at least for now. But who among mortals would have the wisdom and courage to judge the goddesses? Zeus chose Paris, a young prince from the faraway city of Troy. Paris was known for his fairness and good looks, but he lived a quiet life far from his father's palace. Many years before, it had been foretold that Paris would one day bring great trouble to Troy. So his father, King Priam, sent him away to grow up among shepherds on the slopes of Mount Ida. One morning, as Paris sat beneath a tree watching his flock, he saw three figures walking toward him. As they grew closer, he realized they were not ordinary women. The three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, stood before him, each more beautiful than any woman Paris had ever seen. They explained why they had come and told him that Zeus had chosen him to decide who among them was the fairest. Paris felt nervous and afraid. He knew that whoever he chose would be pleased, but the others would be angry. But the goddesses did not give him time to think. Each tried to persuade him, offering him rewards if he picked her. Hera, standing tall and proud, promised Paris power and wealth. If you choose me, she said, I will make you the greatest king in the world. You will rule over vast lands, and people will bow before you. You will be honored above all mortals. Athena, wise and strong, stepped forward. If you choose me, Paris, she said, I will give you wisdom and skill in war. You will never be defeated, and your name will be remembered forever as the bravest and cleverest of all men. Aphrodite, with a smile that made the flowers bloom, spoke last. Paris, if you choose me, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. She will be yours, and your heart will know true happiness. Paris listened to each goddess, his heart beating fast. He thought about power and wisdom, but in the end, he was young, and the promise of love was too tempting to resist. He gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, saying she was the fairest. Hera and Athena were furious. They glared at Paris with a look that promised trouble. Neither goddess forgot the insult, and both swore to punish Paris and Troy for his choice. Aphrodite smiled at Paris and promised to keep her word. She told him that the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, queen of Sparta. But Aphrodite did not explain that Helen was already married to Menelaus, the powerful king of Sparta. In faraway Sparta, the beautiful Helen lived as a queen. She was known throughout Greece for her beauty. People said that when she was born, Zeus sent a swan to protect her, for he was her father, and Leda, the queen of Sparta, was her mother. Helen grew up surrounded by luxury, music, and laughter, but also by suitors. Men from all over Greece came to ask for her hand in marriage. Kings, princes, and heroes all wanted to marry Helen. Helen's stepfather, King Tyndareus, knew her choice would matter not just for Sparta but for all of Greece. He was afraid that if Helen picked one man, the rest would become angry and fight, bringing war to his kingdom. So, the clever Odysseus, one of her suitors, offered a solution. Odysseus suggested that all the suitors should swear an oath to protect Helen's husband, whoever he turned out to be, and defend their marriage if anyone tried to take her away. The suitors agreed, thinking it a fair plan, and Helen chose Menelaus, who became king of Sparta. Back in Troy, Paris's life among the shepherds was interrupted when a group of messengers came searching for him. His father, King Priam, wanted him to return to the palace. Priam was old and wise, and though he remembered the prophecy that Paris would cause Troy great trouble, he longed to see his son. Paris returned to Troy and was welcomed by his family. His mother, Queen Hecuba, wept with joy, and his brothers and sisters greeted him warmly. Soon after Paris returned, Aphrodite appeared to him in a dream. She reminded him of her promise and told him it was time to claim his reward. She told him to prepare a great ship and sail to Sparta, where Helen lived. Paris, eager and curious, gathered his friends and set out on the journey. The ship was filled with gifts for Menelaus, for Paris intended to visit as a friend, not an enemy. When Paris arrived in Sparta, Menelaus welcomed him with open arms. He did not know of the promise that Aphrodite had made. Menelaus showed Paris the riches of his kingdom, introduced him to his friends and family, and trusted him as a guest. All the while, Aphrodite worked her magic. She whispered in Helen's ear, filling her heart with longing and making Paris seem more handsome and charming than any man she had ever met. Helen found herself drawn to Paris, unable to resist his beauty and kind words. The two spent time together, talking and laughing in the gardens and halls of the palace. One day, Menelaus was called away to Crete for a funeral. He trusted Paris and left him in charge of the palace. As soon as Menelaus was gone, Paris begged Helen to run away with him. At first, Helen hesitated. She thought of her husband, her daughter Hermione, and her home. But Aphrodite's magic was strong, and Helen could not say no. Under the cover of night, Helen and Paris gathered treasures from the palace and hurried to Paris's ship. They sailed away toward Troy, leaving Sparta behind. Some stories say Helen went willingly, while others claim Paris kidnapped her. But in the end, Helen was gone, and Menelaus woke to find his wife and his honor stolen. The news of Helen's disappearance spread quickly. Menelaus was filled with rage and sorrow. He called upon his brother Agamemnon, who came at once with many soldiers. Together, they sent messages to all the Greek kings and heroes who had once sworn to protect Helen's marriage. They reminded them of their oath and demanded their help to bring Helen back and punish Troy for what Paris had done. All over Greece, kings and warriors prepared for war. Some came gladly, eager for glory and adventure. Others came because they had no choice, bound by their promise. The greatest heroes of Greece gathered together. Odysseus, clever and cunning, who tried at first to pretend he was mad so he would not have to leave his wife and son. Ajax, huge and strong, unmatched in battle except by Achilles. Nestor, the wise old king of Pylos, who had seen many wars and lived to tell their tales. Diomedes, young and full of energy, eager to prove himself. Menestheus, the careful and cautious king of Athens. And Idomeneus, the brave warrior from Crete. But the Greeks knew they needed one more hero, Achilles, the son of Peleus and Thetis. Achilles was still young, but everyone knew he was the greatest warrior in Greece. His mother, Thetis, feared for his life. She knew that if Achilles went to Troy, he would never return. To protect him, Thetis disguised Achilles as a girl and hid him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Skyros. Odysseus, always clever, suspected this trick. He went to Skyros with gifts for the king's daughters, beautiful dresses, jewels, and hidden among them a set of fine weapons. As the daughters admired the gifts, Achilles could not resist the weapons and revealed himself. Odysseus smiled, knowing he had found the hero they needed. At last, all the leaders gathered at Aulis, a port where the Greek ships waited. The fleet was mighty, hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors, all ready to sail to Troy. But as they prepared to leave, a strange thing happened. The winds died, and the sea became like glass. The ships could not move. The Greeks waited and waited, but the winds did not return. The prophet Calchas said that Artemis, goddess of the hunt, was angry. Agamemnon had killed one of her sacred deer, and only a great sacrifice would calm her rage. Calchas said Agamemnon must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon was horrified. He loved his daughter and did not want to harm her, but without the winds, the army could not sail and the mission to Troy would fail. Agamemnon sent for Iphigenia, telling his wife Clytemnestra that their daughter would be married to Achilles, the greatest hero of Greece. When Iphigenia arrived and learned the truth, she wept and begged for her life. Some say Artemis took pity on her and replaced her with a deer at the last moment. Others say Iphigenia was truly sacrificed. Either way, the winds came back and the Greek fleet set sail for Troy. Back in Troy, Paris and Helen arrived to a mixed welcome. Paris was happy and proud, but his family was worried. King Priam and Queen Hecuba feared the trouble that would come. Hector, Paris's older brother, was the greatest warrior in Troy and a true prince, brave, wise, and honorable. Hector loved his brother, but knew that Paris's actions would bring war to their city. The people of Troy were amazed by Helen's beauty, but many whispered that she was the cause of their coming sorrow. The Trojans prepared for war. They called on their allies from nearby kingdoms and sent messengers to distant lands. Troy was a rich and powerful city, with tall walls built by the gods Poseidon and Apollo. The Trojans were skilled in battle, and their leaders were brave. Hector, wise and just, Aeneas, noble and strong, beloved by his mother Aphrodite. Deiphobus and Helenus, Paris's brothers, each skilled in different ways, and many others. As the Greeks sailed closer, the gods watched from Mount Olympus. Some took sides. Hera and Athena, still angry at Paris, supported the Greeks and promised to help them win. Aphrodite, who loved Paris and Helen, supported the Trojans and begged the other gods to spare the city. Zeus, the king of the gods, tried to remain neutral, but even he had the favorites among the heroes. The stage was set for a great war. After a few days, the Greeks landed on the beach. They built a camp surrounded by a wall of earth and wood and lined up their ships side by side, creating a small city of their own. Every leader had his place, every hero his tent. Agamemnon, the proud and powerful king of Mycenae, stood at the center, surrounded by his brother Menelaus, wise Nestor, mighty Ajax, clever Odysseus, young Diomedes, and of course, the greatest of all, Achilles. Achilles was different from all the other warriors. He moved with a speed and grace that amazed those who watched him. His mother, Thetis, had dipped him in the river Styx as a baby, making almost all his body invulnerable, except for the heel by which she held him. Achilles knew that his fate was to die young if he fought at Troy, but he also knew that his name would be remembered forever. His best friend and companion was Patroclus, gentle and kind, who fought by his side. The Greeks did not attack the city at once. First, they sent messengers to ask for Helen's return. King Priam and the people of Troy met the Greeks' envoys with respect and sorrow, but Paris refused to give Helen back. Some in Troy begged Priam to return Helen and avoid war, but the city was divided. Some believed Paris should do the honorable thing. Others felt their pride would not allow them to give in to threats. Priam, torn between love for his son and fear for his city, could not decide. The Trojans prepared for battle. With the talks failed, the Greeks began to fight. The war did not happen all at once, but in a series of battles and raids, with both sides testing each other's strength. The Greeks attacked the smaller towns around Troy, capturing supplies and making allies. They took prisoners, including many Trojan women, who would become part of the Greek camp. Among them was Briseis, who was claimed by Achilles and would later play a crucial role in the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. The gods watched the war closely. Hera and Athena, determined to punish Paris and Troy, inspired the Greeks with courage and clever plans. Aphrodite, along with Apollo and Artemis, protected the Trojans when they could. Poseidon, god of the sea, secretly favored the Greeks. Each day, the two armies faced each other on the wide, dusty plain between the Greek camp and the city walls. The Trojans, led by Hector, fought to protect their home and families. Paris also fought, but he was not as brave as his brother. He was skilled with the bow and beautiful to look at, but many in Troy whispered that he was the cause of their suffering. Even so, Helen stayed by Paris's side. She missed her daughter and her old life, but she knew she could never return to Greece. Each of the Greek heroes had his own moments of glory. Ajax was huge and strong, wielding a shield as large as a door. Diomedes, young and fierce, fought with the help of the gods. Odysseus, always clever, planned raids and devised tricks to outwit the Trojans. Menelaus, burning with anger over Helen, sought Paris in battle, but Paris often hid behind the walls. The war was not just swords and spears. Sometimes the sides agreed to single combat between champions, hoping the outcome would decide the war. Menelaus and Paris fought in front of both armies. Menelaus easily overpowered Paris, but before he could finish the fight, Aphrodite swept Paris away in a cloud and took him back to the safety of Helen's chamber in Troy. The Greeks were furious, and the Trojans felt ashamed. The war continued unresolved. As the years passed, the Greeks began to suffer from hunger and disease. Their supplies ran low, and arguments broke out among the leaders. Agamemnon, proud and stubborn, often quarreled with Achilles, who felt he was not given enough honor for his deeds. The other kings tried to keep the peace, but the tension grew. One of the most famous disputes happened when the Greeks captured Chryses, the daughter of a priest of Apollo, and gave her to Agamemnon as a prize. Her father came to the Greek camp, bringing gifts and begging for her return. Agamemnon refused, and the old man prayed to Apollo to punish the Greeks. Apollo, angry at the insult to his priest, sent a plague that swept through the Greek camp, killing many men. The prophet Calchas told the Greeks that the plague would only end if Agamemnon returned Chryses to her father. Agamemnon, furious at losing his prize, demanded another in return. He chose Briseis, who belonged to Achilles. Achilles was outraged. He felt insulted and dishonored, for he had done more for the Greeks than any other hero. In anger, Achilles left the battlefield and refused to fight. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to lose. The Trojans, led by Hector, pushed the Greeks back. They burned some of the Greek ships and nearly destroyed the entire fleet. The Greeks begged Achilles to return, offering him gifts and apologies. But Achilles' pride would not let him forgive Agamemnon. During this time, the Trojans sent messengers to their allies in distant lands calling for help. Warriors from Lycia, led by the noble Sarpedon, and from Thrace, led by Rhesus, came to fight for Troy. The Amazons, fierce women warriors led by Queen Penthesilea, also joined the fight. Each new arrival brought hope to Troy and fear to the Greeks. The Greeks too sought help. Diomedes and Odysseus went on secret missions, sneaking into the Trojan camp at night to gather information and kill important enemies. In one famous raid, they killed Rhesus and stole his famous horses, which were said to be faster than the wind. The gods continued to play their own games. Sometimes they fought each other on the battlefield, causing storms, earthquakes, and miracles. Sometimes they disguised themselves as mortals, helping their favorite heroes or tricking their enemies. Among the Greeks, the wise and old Nestor tried to keep the peace and give good advice. He reminded the leaders of their duties and their promises, telling stories of past wars and heroes. Nestor's stories often gave comfort, but sometimes they reminded the men of all they had lost and all they stood to lose. In Troy, life went on behind the walls. The women wove cloth, cared for children, and prayed to the gods for peace. Andromache, Hector's wife, was always afraid for her husband and son. She begged Hector not to fight, but Hector felt he had no choice. Helen, too, spent her days in sorrow, wishing she could undo the events that brought her to Troy. The war dragged on, and both sides suffered. Many heroes fell in battle, and many families lost sons and fathers. The Greeks grew tired and homesick, missing their wives, children, and the peaceful lands they had left behind. The Trojans feared for their city, their future, and their lives. Yet, through all the hardship, the war continued, driven by pride, honor, and the will of the gods. The war was no longer just about Helen, it was about glory, revenge, and the fate of two great peoples. Meanwhile, inside the Greek camp, the absence of Achilles was felt like a wound. Achilles spent his days apart, sitting by the shore, looking out at the sea. Sometimes his friend Patroclus would sit with him, trying to comfort him. But Achilles was lost in his anger and sorrow over Agamemnon's insult. The Greek leaders visited his tent again and again, offering gifts, gold, and apologies. But Achilles would not return to battle. Not even Odysseus, with all his clever words, could change Achilles' mind. Meanwhile, the Trojans grew bold. Hector led them again and again to the Greek wall, and soon they reached the ships themselves. Many Greek warriors fell, and the fleet was nearly set on fire. Agamemnon and Menelaus fought bravely, but without Achilles, the Greeks could not match Hector's courage and skill. Patroclus, who loved Achilles like a brother, could not stand to see his friends and comrades die. He begged Achilles to let him take his place, to wear his shining armor and lead the Myrmidons, the fierce warriors who served Achilles into battle. The Greeks are dying, Patroclus pleaded. If you cannot forgive Agamemnon, at least let me help the men who need us. Achilles agreed at last. He gave Patroclus his own armor, telling him to drive the Trojans from the ships but not to pursue them to the walls of Troy. Do not seek glory for yourself, Achilles warned. Save our friends, but remember your limits. Patroclus put on Achilles' brilliant armor and took up his spear. The Myrmidons rallied behind him, thinking Achilles had returned. When Patroclus led the charge, the Greeks found new strength. The Trojans, seeing what they believed was Achilles himself, turned and ran from the ships. Patroclus fought bravely, slaying many Trojans, including Sarpedon, the beloved son of Zeus, who fell with honor in the dust. But Patroclus, carried away by victory, forgot Achilles' warning. He pursued the Trojans all the way to the walls. There, Apollo struck Patroclus from behind, knocking off his helmet. Wounded and dazed, Patroclus was surrounded by Trojan warriors and finally killed by Hector, who did not know he was fighting Achilles' friend and not Achilles himself. When the news reached Achilles, grief and rage filled him like a storm. He wept and tore his hair, mourning Patroclus. Thetis, his mother, heard his cries and came from the sea to comfort him. She promised him new armor, a shield so beautiful and strong that it shone like a star. Achilles swore to avenge Patroclus, even though he knew it would mean his own death. The next day, Achilles returned to battle, wearing his new armor and roaring like a lion. The Greeks cheered and the Trojans trembled, for they knew the greatest warrior had come back. Achilles rushed into the fight, caring nothing for his own safety. He killed many Trojans, his anger unstoppable, and the gods themselves watched in awe and fear. Hector, brave as ever, stood before the gates of Troy, waiting for Achilles. He knew he could not escape his fate, but he would not run. His parents, Priam and Hecuba, begged him to come inside the walls, but Hector refused. He wished only to protect his city and his family, to do his duty as a prince and a father. The two greatest warriors met on the plain. The duel was fierce. In the end, Achilles struck Hector down and killed him. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it before the walls, refusing to return it to Hector's family. The Trojans watched in horror and grief, and even the gods were moved by the cruelty of Achilles' anger. That night, King Priam, heartbroken and desperate, went to Achilles' tent. He kissed the hands of the man who had killed his son, begging for Hector's body. Achilles, remembering his own father and all the sorrow the war had brought, finally returned Hector's body to Priam. For a brief moment, there was peace. Both armies agreed to a temporary truce, while the Trojans mourned and gave Hector the funeral he deserved. But the war was not over. With Hector gone, the Trojans grew weaker. Achilles continued to fight, but even he could not escape fate. Paris, with the help of Apollo, shot an arrow at Achilles and struck him in the heel, the only part of his body that was not protected. Achilles fell, and the Greeks wept for their greatest hero. The armor of Achilles was given to Odysseus, who defeated Ajax in a contest. Ajax, overcome by shame and sadness, took his own life. The Greeks, needing a new plan, turned to cunning and trickery. Odysseus and Diomedes sneaked into the city to steal the Palladium, the sacred statue of Athena that protected Troy, believing it was the key to victory. As the war dragged into its 10th year, hope faded for both the Greeks and the Trojans. The plain outside Troy was littered with broken weapons, fallen heroes, and memories of countless battles. Both armies had lost many friends and leaders. The Greeks, exhausted and desperate to return home, began to wonder if they would ever conquer Troy. The Trojans, equally weary, prayed each day that their city's mighty walls would hold. Inside the Greek camp, the leaders gathered at night, their faces hard and tired. Agamemnon and Menelaus argued for more attacks, but the Greeks were losing heart. Odysseus spoke up at last. We cannot win with force alone, he said. We must use our wits. I have a plan that could bring Troy down without another battle. Odysseus's plan was daring and strange. The Greeks would build a great wooden horse, many times larger than a real horse, and leave it outside the gates of Troy. Inside the hollow belly of the horse, the bravest Greek warriors would hide. The rest of the Greek army would burn their camp and ships, making it look as if they were giving up and sailing home. But most of the Greeks would only hide behind a nearby island waiting for a signal. The horse was built by Epeus, a skilled craftsman, under Odysseus's direction. It was tall as a house and carved from the finest timber. When it was finished, the bravest warriors climbed inside Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, who was the son of Achilles, and others. The rest of the Greeks set fire to their tents, boarded their ships, and sailed away from the beach, just far enough to disappear from sight. The next morning, the people of Troy looked out to see the Greek camp empty and the ships gone. At first, they could hardly believe it. Cautiously, they left the city and walked to the beach, wondering if it was some trick. There, in the middle of the plain, they found the giant wooden horse, beautiful and mysterious, standing as a silent gift. The Trojans gathered around the horse, arguing about what to do. Some warned that it was a trap, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, but others convinced them otherwise. Sinon, a Greek left behind to trick the Trojans, told a convincing story. The Greeks built this horse for Athena as a gift to win her favor for their return home. If you bring it inside the walls, it will bring Troy good fortune. With great effort and celebration, the Trojans dragged the horse through their gates. They broke down part of their walls to make room for it, and the people danced in the streets. That night, the whole city feasted, celebrating the end of the war. Wine flowed, music played, and for the first time in 10 years, the Trojans felt safe. But deep inside the horse, the Greek warriors waited in silence, holding their breath. When midnight came and the city lay sleeping, the warriors slipped out of the horse, opened the gates, and let the Greek army pour into the city. The Greeks swept through Troy like a storm. They set fires, broke down doors, and fought any who resisted. The people of Troy, taken by surprise, could do little to defend themselves. Many heroes fell that night. Priam, the old king, was killed at the altar by Neoptolemus. Queen Hecuba and the women of Troy were captured and taken as slaves. Cassandra, Priam's daughter, was dragged from the temple of Athena. Aeneas, prince of Troy and son of Aphrodite, fought bravely but knew the city was lost. He escaped the burning city. Helen, whose beauty had brought about the war, was found by Menelaus. Some stories say he raised his sword to kill her, but when he saw her face again, his anger melted away, and he took her back to Greece. Others say Helen was protected by Aphrodite and forgiven by all. The gods watched the destruction of Troy with mixed feelings. Hera and Athena were satisfied. Aphrodite wept for her city and her mortal son Aeneas. Poseidon, who helped the Greeks win, soon grew angry with their pride, and Zeus, who tried to remain neutral, mourned the loss of so many heroes. The Greeks had won, but victory came at a terrible price. Aeneas, the only Trojan prince to survive, led a small group of followers out through a secret passage carrying his father and the household gods of Troy. Guided by Aphrodite, Aeneas wandered the seas seeking a new land where the Trojans could start again. His journey would take many years and many trials, but his descendants were destined to found the city of Rome. The Greeks themselves faced a long and difficult journey home. They had angered the gods by their pride, cruelty, and the destruction of Troy's holy places. As the fleet sailed away, storms rose up and scattered the ships. Many heroes met strange and often tragic fates. Agamemnon's homecoming was bloody. His wife, Clytemnestra, had not forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter, Iphigenia. With her lover Aegisthus, she plotted Agamemnon's murder. As soon as he stepped into his palace, she killed him, ending his life in betrayal and blood. Menelaus and Helen also wandered for years. Their ship was blown far off course, and they traveled to Egypt, where they lived as guests of Pharaoh Proteus. They finally returned to Sparta, where Helen was accepted once more as queen. Some say she lived happily, others say she was haunted forever by the memories of Troy. Odysseus, cleverest of the Greeks, suffered the longest and most dangerous journey of all. For 10 years, he was blown from island to island, facing monsters, enchantresses, and temptations. He outwitted the witch Circe, escaped from the deadly song of the sirens, and survived the whirlpool Charybdis and the monster Scylla. For 7 years, he was held captive by the nymph Calypso, who loved him and offered him immortality if he would stay. But Odysseus longed for home and for his wife Penelope, who waited faithfully in Ithaca. At last, with the help of Athena, Odysseus returned home disguised as a beggar, defeated the suitors who had plagued his house, and was reunited with Penelope and his son Telemachus. Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, returned to Greece. Later, he founded a new dynasty and became a king in Epirus, but his life was marked by restlessness and sorrow. The women of Troy suffered most of all. Andromache, Hector's wife, became the slave of Neoptolemus. Hecuba, once a proud queen, was taken as a slave to Greece. Cassandra, who saw the future but was never believed, was dragged from her temple and taken by Agamemnon. The city of Troy, once golden and proud, was left a smoking ruin, its people scattered and its glory lost. Yet the stories of the Trojan War lived on. Poets sang of the bravery and tragedy, the love and loss, the pride and punishment that shaped the fate of nations. The names of Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, Helen, and Aeneas echoed down the centuries, reminding everyone of the power of the gods, the strength of the heroes, and the sorrow of war. The war that had begun with a golden apple and ended with a wooden horse. So there we have come to the end of Homer's Iliad. Do let us know if you like the story and also tell us if you want to know the story of Odysseus as well. Stay subscribed for more stories like this. So till our next story, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Good night.